Joshua felt like a hermit coming down his mountain of solitude. It would be fine, he told himself. Yes, he hadn't showered. His beard was uncombed and a mess. Not quite a full beard, but too much grown wild to look cultivated. He also needed a haircut. And maybe he shouldn't leave his apartment in his bathrobe. His precious stash of clean clothes had melted away. So much so that he ran the washing machine for the first time in 2 weeks. So, the bathrobe it was. On the off chance that he needed his last clean outfit for something important. The stairs were creaking with each step down. This building was a mess. Granted, the landlord tried, but there was no mistaking it. It was old as hell. At least, it was cheap. Or had been. When Joshua still had a job. Now, he was overdue for a while. The lobby hinted at the bygone past of luxury. Once, this building housed grand apartments for the wealthy. As they moved away, those apartments had been split up time and time again. The lobby itself was generous in space. It even had 2 couches and side tables. It had seen better days, of course. As had the lobby itself. Not for the first time, Joshua wondered if the lobby or his apartment was bigger. His mailbox was overflowing. Again, he had postponed emptying it as far as he could. Always bad news in it. Most of it had been caused by himself. The person who sent hundreds of applications usually received hundreds of rejection letters. By now, he couldn't afford to send as many. Still, there was always the silver lining that there was one letter with a callback. Shit! Opening up, a small avalanche of letters flooded into his arms. He scrambled to not let any fall. Once tamed, Joshua tried to sift through them quickly. Most were thin. The bare minimum. The envelope and 1 sheet of paper. Probably a rejection letter. 3 were thicker. Multiple pages. Not a good sign. Even worse were the ones with red stamped on letters that said overdue. The tortured squeal of the front door clued Joshua in that he wasn't alone anymore. A glance revealed Miss White Creek and Joshua scrambled to close his mailbox. It was time to go back to his life of being a hermit. It was a mistake to turn from his mailbox in the direction Miss White Creek was coming from. For a moment, he was shocked enough to drop all his mail. He never had gotten a handle on Miss White Creek and even less on her bosom. One day, she runs around nearly flat-chested. The next day, her cleavage puts Pamela Anderson's to shame. If someone asked him what size she truly had, Joshua wouldn't bet money on coming even close. He knew there were push-ups and binders. But Miss White Creek defied what physics might rule as probable. Today, Miss White Creek had taken physics by the underwear and had pulled a wedgie, slapped it thrice, and called it silly. Joshua couldn't even describe her size with words. Her current cup size must be somewhere in the mid-range of the alphabet. Hence him losing his mail. Sorry. He scrambled to pick up all his letters. Clutching them to his chest, Joshua made for the stairs. Mr. Farmer, right? Joshua stopped. He hoped to go unnoticed. Now he was caught in his miserable state. He half turned around, expecting dismissive comments about his disheveled appearance. You dropped something. Again, Joshua's glance was riveted to breasts that had no business being this big. Thoughts hammered in his head that he was being rude right now, but his eyes were glued. Until he noticed something red in the peripheral of his tunnel vision. Slow, he managed to focus on it. A letter. The envelope was an angry red. With slightly trembling hands, he grabbed it. Thanks. His voice might have been inaudible or barely a whisper. This day couldn't get any worse. On the way up the stairs, he confirmed the sender. It looked like his landlord had become tired of waiting for his money. The question was, how much time Joshua had now before being evicted. Slipping into his apartment, Joshua let himself fall against the door, breathing as hard as if he had run a marathon. Now, it all came crashing down. He had seen it for a while, but now the butcher's bill was due. Next stop in life, homelessness. The sudden buzz of his doorbell nearly gave Joshua a heart attack. This couldn't be the landlord already, right? Maybe the police? To evict him by force. Nightmarish scenarios unfolded in his head. They would only stop if he opened the door. He placed his hand on the door and gathered strength. Breath in, breath out. After the third time repeating, he opened the door. It was Miss White Creek, giving him a gentle smile as he opened the door. The fact that he noticed her smile was strange too. She had changed. Not just into another top. Her bosom had stopped defying the laws of physics. They even looked normal for a woman of her figure. I am sorry to disturb you. If Miss White Creek was perturbed by his looks, she didn't let it be known. I was wondering if you, perhaps, would join me for a cup of tea. Joshua needed a moment, parsing the heard sentences again and again through his mind. And they made sense, but only addressed to anyone else but him. His confusion limited an otherwise eloquent reply to one word, what? Well. Miss White Creek gave him a coy smile. It is nearly afternoon and I could use some company. Tea time is best enjoyed if not alone. Those words didn't make any more sense to Joshua than those before. Why would a woman in her late 30s he hardly knew invite him into her apartment? And for tea? I don't think that is a good idea. I think it is a great idea, Miss White Creek insisted. I made a fresh pie this morning. You can have a slice or two. I am not hungry. If it rains, it pours. The next betrayal came from his stomach, which used this moment to loudly growl. Of course, he was hungry. He lived off cheap instant noodles for the past few weeks. Just the thought of pie, any kind of pie, had his mouth watering. I take that as a yes. She beamed at him, as if none of his words had any meaning. I'll be seeing you in half an hour. Don't be late. As she turned around, Joshua needed a moment to close the door. What the hell was going on? Nothing made sense anymore. First, the eviction letter, and now this? What did she even want with him? Maybe she needed a boy toy for the night. Joshua nearly snorted at the thought. Yeah, sure. He was the epitome of sexy right now. With an unkempt beard and tousled hair, while dressed in a bathrobe that needs an urgent appointment with a washer too. Then again, what did he have to lose? If all he would have in his immediate future were the streets of his city, why not have one last slice of pie? It would probably be the last time anyone around him would acknowledge him as human. But he couldn't go as he was right now. There was still a last smidgen of pride in his bones. Half an hour. It was not a lot. Joshua sprang into action. The first stop was the shower. He needed one desperately. There wasn't much body wash left, but what he managed to squeeze out had to double as a shampoo too. Stumbling out of the bathtub, Joshua went for the razor. There was no saving this beard. It had to come off. He should have been more careful, but time was of the essence. Hence the rushed job cost him a few nicks here and there. Taming his damp hair took longer. By now, his once shortcut hairstyle had sprouted into a mess that nearly reached his shoulders. There was no time for a haircut appointment and he didn't have an electric razor. He doubted anything with scissors would end well. Hence he smoothed it out as best as he could and tied it into a small ponytail. The choice of clothing was limited. Slacks, white shirt, and jacket. His suit reserved for job interviews. It was halfway clean. A bit too formal for tea, but better than a stained t-shirt and jeans. Or a bathrobe. At last, he left his apartment, ringing the bell of Miss White Creek 35 minutes later. Only seconds later, the door was opened. "Ah, Mr. Farmer. I half thought you'd stood me up. But now I see you dressed up for the occasion. Please, come in." Her hallway was immaculate and tastefully decorated. She waved him onward. "You can keep your shoes on. This way. I have everything ready." She led him to a room Joshua might describe as a reading parlor. A small table with 2 chairs by the large windows. Every other wall had bookcases that reached up to the high ceiling. They weren't all filled with books. Here and there leather-bound paper had to make space for some curio. It gave Joshua strange vibes. Something about it gave him an esoteric feel. He heard of witches. What are they called nowadays? Wicca? Or maybe those soothsayers and fortune-tellers at every carnival ever. Not that Joshua believed any of it. These curios made him believe Miss White Creek was into that stuff. Maybe on a more academic level. She could be into anthropology. Maybe gathering it for the study of folklore and whatnot. Now that Joshua thought about it, he had no idea what she did for a living. Miss White Creek took a seat and indicated for Joshua to do the same. His eyes fell on the pie. Pecan. Not his favorite, but right now, he couldn't wait to dig in. He just hoped his stomach would behave long enough that he wouldn't embarrass himself. Again. Miss White Creek made a small show of pouring tea, adding milk or sugar and asking if Joshua needed any too. Then placed each of them a slice of pie on a plate. If she was expecting small talk, then she was in for a rough time. Joshua tried to pace himself, but hunger won. He was finished before Miss White Creek was even half done. As if it was the most natural thing in the world, she just poured him another cup and put another slice on his plate. "You must be wondering why I invited you," Miss White Creek mused aloud as Joshua neared the end of his second slice. "If I would hazard a guess, I would say charity." Maybe this was a bit direct, but he thought she might appreciate it. Far from it. "I guess it is an apology." She actually sounded a little embarrassed. "I startled you. That was not my intention. You saw me, what do they say? Bring out the big guns? You looked very confused." Tits a lot. Joshua could slap himself. Maybe if he went word by word, it would be better. "I meant, it was a lot." Miss White Creek gave a ladylike little chuckle, betrayed by the words that followed. "Oh, they were definitely tits. Big fat tits. And believe it or not, my client wants them even bigger." Seeing Joshua confused, Miss White Creek collected herself and started anew. "Sorry. That was a little too forward of me. Let's start with the basics. Do you believe in magic, Mr. Farmer?" Their little talk was already giving him whiplash. She was changing gears so often that he felt a headache come on. At least, he had been somewhat right. Her question implied she was into esoteric stuff for sure. The question was if she was a believer or just someone who studied it for fun or academia. "I am afraid not," Joshua admitted. "If there ever was such a thing as magic, then it must have left this world before I was born. Or very well hidden," Miss White Creek added and chuckled over her own joke. "But I take it you are a skeptic. Would you allow me to convince you otherwise?" Sure. She had wined and dined him. Well, tea-ed and pie-ed him. It bought her enough goodwill that Joshua could at least humor her. She probably will read him his future or lay some cards. He didn't see anything to pull out a rabbit or pigeon. Not unless she hid them in her cleavage. To his surprise, Miss White Creek really did start to undo the buttons to her blouse. Joshua looked as two breasts appeared. Of course, he looked. She expected him to look, right? Though these ones were a lot smaller than those she had surprised him with earlier. Then, she reached in, somehow peeling off her left breast before his very eye. The right one followed moments later. Now utterly flat-chested, she showed him both separated breasts. Now that made sense. Miss White Creek wore inserts. He didn't know how they stayed put, but that would explain the huge fluctuations in her apparent bosom size. Maybe there was some kind of adhesive under them that held them in place. All very explainable. No magic at all. Except for those huge tits from before. He doubted even industrial glue could wield them to her skin. Now that would take magic. Or, more likely, a very good bra. Joshua had it all figured out. Until Miss White Creek placed her left breast on the table. It not only stuck to it but appeared to fuse to the very surface. The rose-pink skin started to change to brown, mimicking the table perfectly, right down to the wood grain. Joshua lifted his hand but stopped halfway. Go ahead, Miss White Creek dared him. Touch it. So, he did. The breast was solid under his fingertips. Not a little bit of give. It felt like lacquered wood and sounded like it too as he rapped with his knuckles on it. He even tried to pry the breasts from the table. There was no give at all. Now, touch this one, she instructed him and held out her right breast. It was soft and cold. Not ice cold. Room temperature, he guessed. It was pliable. Just as a breast should be. Then, Miss White Creek brushed off the last crumbs from Joshua's plate and placed her breast on it. In seconds, it fused. Became one with it. The skin turned white as the plate and even the delicate painting on the rim of it was transferred to the breast where it overlapped. He could lift the plate. It was now significantly heavier. The breast didn't slide off as he tipped the plate. Under his fingertips, it was hard and smooth. Just like porcelain should be. But not breasts. With slightly trembling hands, he handed her back his plate. I admit, if that isn't magic, then it might be so advanced technology that it might as well be magic. Maybe nanites. But Joshua didn't voice his guess aloud. I admit, I never had a hand for technology. Her frown looked downright cute. A fact that felt a little strange to Joshua, as she was a decade or more older than him. Peeling off both breasts from their new homes appeared to be as easy as from her own skin. Then, she stood up. Come on. I would like to show you my library. Joshua looked at the many bookshelves. This isn't it? Miss White Creek gave him a small amused laugh but remained quiet. She went back to the hallway. You know, most others would have run by now. I think choosing you was the right call to make. Choosing me for Joshua's question died on his lips as they entered a new room. All the walls were covered in large tiles. Many of them had protruding pairs of breasts on them. A few of those breasts were so large that they took up 2 tiles at once. He saw all kinds of shapes and sizes. Some were more round while others had more of a teardrop shape. Most were quite perky, but not all. Leaving the stunned Joshua by the door, Miss White Creek went in and placed her pair of breasts on a tile. In moments they stuck and turned to ceramic. She then waved him over. Pick a pair. Any pair. Hesitant, Joshua followed her suggestion. Looking at each of the pairs. He even spotted the mammoth ones that had to be those from down in the lobby. He was half-minded to pick them. Just to see that this really wasn't a trick. Instead, he chose one at random. Large ones. On Miss White Creek's slender frame they might amount to a D cup or double D. They had large areolas and puffy nipples. Good choice. As she peeled them off the wall, they turned to flesh. However, not the pale skin as before. Rather a deep brown. They were a donation. A trans man was donating them to me. And it would have been a shame to just cut them off, don't you think? Sure. What else was he supposed to say? Miss White Creek placed first the left breast and it fused. Now taking on the pink skin that she possessed. Then the right one followed. Now, the last check. So, just to make sure you really believe me when I say that magic exists. Go ahead. Make sure they are real. Joshua looked doubtful, but as she simply waited, he complied. He was gentle, cupping them without using too much force. They felt real, soft and warm. Not room temperature, but body temperature. They are real, all right, Joshua admitted. And I guess magic too. Good. She looked mightily satisfied with herself. Now, let's revisit the reason you are here. I don't have any breasts to steal. The bad joke slipped over his tongue before he could stop himself. No, you don't. And I rather thought about the opposite. Let me explain. She turned around to the wall behind them. As Joshua did too, he now noticed that the tiles there were covered in breasts too. But these he often could barely make out. If not for the nipples, many would be too flat to notice. You see, for a not-so-small fee, I take breasts in. Yes, I can indeed steal them from other people. Not that I want to. These here are all by customers. I can place an enchantment on them that makes them grow while placed on someone with enough magical potential. And when they are the right size, I return them to their owner, who then has bigger breasts without hassle or stupid silicone implants. That's quite the job you have, Joshua admitted. Looking over 36 underdeveloped breasts, another thought occurred to him. And quite the workload. And that's where you come in. Me? Did he just mishear? You want me to wear breasts? No, wait. That wouldn't work. You said someone who does magic. Someone with magical potential, Miss Whitecreek corrected. No, you can't do magic. There isn't enough magical potential inside you. But there is some. Enough for my enchantments to work. But I can't wear breasts, Joshua protested. Why not? I am not saying you need to wear large ones. Look at these. She peeled off a pair that had been nearly flat against the ceramic tile. The target size for these is around a B cup for someone of your chest size. With your magical potential, it might take only a few days. Easily hidden under clothing and off before they get noticeable. Surprisingly, it sounded doable. The emotional part of Joshua was freaking out. But the logical part smelled opportunity. What would I get out of this? For this pair? She dangled them around like sunny side-up eggs. $200 up front upon placing them on you. $400 upon taking them off when they have reached the right size. Taking a larger target size means more money. But you don't need to go all the way. If someone wants bigger than you are comfortable, I can always finish the job myself. You get paid for how much you contribute. Miss Whitecreek smiled. Of course, she did. The moment she had the letter with the eviction notice in her hand, she knew Joshua was desperate. That he would accept. Because what else was he to do? Pound his chest, profess his undying commitment to being a man, and promptly land on the streets? If he stuck to small breasts, then it sounded doable. Reasonable even. We have a deal, Miss Whitecreek. He offered his hand. Call me Twila, partner. They shook. Then I guess you can call me Joshua too, he said to return the sentiment. Now then, Joshua. Shall we get started? He nodded. It took a few moments for him to realize that the initiative was on his part. He felt nervous as he shrugged off his jacket and unbuttoned his shirt. As Twila placed the underdeveloped breasts on his chest, they felt cold for a moment. The strangest tingling went through him, and then it was over. He didn't even feel different. The breasts had been so little that he could hardly make them out on his chest. See? That ain't so bad, is it? Guess not, Joshua admitted. Well then. I guess the next step is due. She removed 10 $20 bills from her pocket and handed them over. And as a signing bonus, I can offer you some more pecan pie. Sounds good? I can already feel we will get along famously. Now that we are breast buddies. Not if she would make more such bad puns, but Joshua chose to remain quiet on that point. Not while pie was at stake. Another day or two, Joshua guessed. They started to actually look like breasts instead of just a little too much fat on his ribs. Not that he had excess fat anywhere on his body. He still was climbing back to a healthy level from the skin and bones version he had been turned into. Thankfully, he slowly gained back what he lost. Now that he could actually afford decent food. Another payday soon, Joshua promised his reflection in the mirror. Then he started to get dressed. This was the third pair he grew for Miss Whitecreek Twila, and this little job paid more than his last two combined. Nearly $2,000 in a little over 2 weeks. They weren't even noticeable under a loose-fitting t-shirt. Tomorrow, they might be noticeable if one was very observant. Joshua wondered if he should take a bigger target cup size for his next pair. It would mean a bigger payout. In the end, he might need to stay a day or two in the apartment. Just to be sure he wouldn't be found out. Of course, going bigger was purely for the money. Not that he was actually tempted to find out how a decent amount of breasts felt. Once dressed, Joshua grabbed a beer from the fridge and wondered what to do. Not for the first time, he mused that he could write more job applications. Surely, Twila would run out of breasts to grow at some point. Now that Joshua was helping to make a dent in her workload. And he could grow breasts while being somewhere at work too. He just had to be a little careful. Maybe later. Joshua let himself drop onto the chair and turned the TV on. He zapped through a few channels until a news report caught his attention. It is most certainly an eruption of water, an expert source explained from a small little window. Below him was a close-up shot of an aerial view that might be Mars. A white area marked was in the center of the red desert and small tendrils seemed to reach out. It is very white for water, an attractive newscaster pointed out. Joshua could clearly see the expert try to stifle a smirk. Well, Mars is very cold. Said water is now snow or ice. The newscaster clearly looked annoyed, but she kept her cool. Then how do you explain that the newest captured material clearly shows the white material flow as if it was still liquid, forming what appears to be rivers? Whatever reply followed was swallowed by the angry buzzing of his doorbell. "I'm coming!" Joshua yelled as whoever was at the door and wouldn't stop ringing the buzzer. Whoever it was, Joshua would give them a piece of his mind. Throwing open the door, every protest slipped his mind as he saw Mr. Kasiragi, as well as 3 burly guys, who wasted no time and pushed past Joshua into the apartment. "Hey, you can't just dash." "Oh, they can." Kasiragi shouted over Joshua. "I had enough. You are out." "But I paid my rent," Joshua protested weakly. "I wired it last week." 1. His landlord raised a finger. "Of 8 you owe me. Your time is up." "No, save your bullshit excuses. They won't help you anymore." "But I got a job now. A good one." "I do not care." Joshua was pushed to the side when one of the men walked out with his TV. "You can't just dash, Mr. Kasiragi. Is this really necessary?" Miss White Creek stood on the staircase and gave a man 20 years her senior a disapproving look that every mother would be proud of. "I can assure you, Mr. Farmer has an income now." "In a matter of dash, this doesn't concern you, Miss White Creek," Kasiragi snapped at her. "He is out. And if I sell his junk, I might see a fraction of the money he owes me." Twila looked ready to protest some more, but then changed tactics. "At least, let him pack some clothes and any important documents he has." The landlord glared at her for a few seconds, then backed down. "Fine. You got 10 minutes. Boys, make sure he only grabs papers and some clothes. Nothing of worth leaves with him. Not even a bloody smartphone." Joshua cursed himself. For a moment he had thought things would look up. How wrong he was. The street was his destination after all. It took him only 5 to grab everything essential. Then he was marched out of his former apartment. "Keys," Kasiragi demanded. As Joshua handed them over, his former landlord had a few more choice words to say. "Now get the fuck out of my building. I don't want to see you here anymore." "I certainly think not," Twila protested. "As it happens, Mr. Farmer will be staying with me as my guest." "Or am I evicted too?" Joshua could hear the teeth grinding of Mr. Kasiragi. But his former landlord swallowed his pride soon enough. "Of course not, Miss White Creek. Just keep him out of trouble. That boy is not good for anybody." Dejected, Joshua followed Twila up the stairs to her apartment. "I am sorry," he said when they were alone again. "I didn't mean to be a burden." "Nonsense," Twila assured him. "I got a free bedroom for guests. You can stay there until you get ground under your feet again. I have the feeling that it shouldn't take too long." Joshua gave a fragile smile. He had to admit, Twila's optimism was infectious. "I'll do my best," he promised. "Oh, let me show you your room." Twila walked with sure steps, but then suddenly stopped. Turning around to him, she looked a little embarrassed. "I hope you don't mind the decorations. For a while now, I used the room to store a little bit of extra tits and boobs." Joshua gave a weak smile. Slowly, he warmed up to Twila's sense of humor and offbeat puns. I am sure I don't mind a few bits and bobs. I am just grateful to have someplace to dash. Joshua fell silent as she opened the room. Breasts. Breasts everywhere. It hadn't been a pun. Breasts of all sizes dotted the walls. They hugged every surface of the dresser and even the headboard of the bed. Stumbling in, he couldn't help but pick up one of the pillows. They even stick to pillows? Surprisingly comfortable, Twila said and gave him a shrug. You see, I got a lot of donations. My job would be way easier if I could just swap them with customers who want bigger ones. But somehow most are rather attached to the idea of having their own back. Just bigger. Well, good. Then you need me and that gets me paid. Joshua took a longer look around. Every surface was covered with breasts. Be it the backside of the door or stuck to the ceiling. Hopefully one of them wouldn't fall off while he slept underneath them. This will take some time to get used to. A random thought made him laugh out loud. One Twila's questioning looks, he had to explain. 5th grade me would have loved this room. I hope it isn't too much, Twila admitted. If so, I am sure we can find another spot to store them. Tits a lot. That got a chuckle out of her. His first misspeaking had become a common phrase between them. I think I can manage. Adult me can handle it. Good. Good. I'll leave you to it. Just as she was about to close the door behind her, she addressed him once more. Tea in an hour? Then we can go over some details. I am afraid it has been a while since I last had a roommate. Sounds good. As soon as the door was closed, Joshua sat down on the bed and gave a deep sigh. Once again a day had turned into a roller coaster of events. And again, Twila saved him from becoming homeless. He was grateful. Not just to have her as a business partner. Slowly, a friendship developed. One he cherished more than ever. Taking a deep breath, Joshua stood up. Time to put away his meager belongings. At least, he could look forward to a payday in a day or two. It might go now into clothing instead of something else. He grabbed the dresser's former knobs, now 2 breasts, and opened it up. Only to let out a choked-up laugh. Shaking his head, he placed his clothing wherever there was space between large wooden breasts. Tits a lot, for sure. You can use this towel and this bathrobe. Oh, I got a washcloth too. Twila loaded both onto Joshua's arms. Now, you can use one of my body washes. They are in the red bottles. Just don't use the coral red one. Oh, and the shampoos are in the purple bottles. Just maybe don't use the fuchsia one. The conditioners are green. Again, best avoid the honeydew-colored one. Thanks. Sorry for being such a burden. Oh, nonsense, Twila waved him off. I know how it is. Listen, one can fail at being a witch. And if you studied witchcraft all these years and don't make it, there aren't a lot of practical skills one has to face the mundane world. If it wasn't for a friend, let's just say I am paying it forward. And maybe one day you can do the same for someone else. I'll remember this, Joshua promised her. One day I will dash, yeah. Yeah. Don't get mushy on me. Now off you go. Wash those breasts, you hear me? They are merchandise, after all. Joshua chuckled. Yes, boss. Twila's bathroom looked a lot different than his own. It was decorated for one. By someone who understood color theory no less. It was also very organized. There were indeed colored bottles on a small shelf beside the bathtub. Neatly sorted by color groups. What really surprised him was that he couldn't spot any pair of breasts anywhere. Granted. If he discounted the pair hanging from his chest. Hanging up his towel on a free hook, Joshua climbed into the bathtub. Just a shower, he decided. A bath might take up too much time and Twila probably wants to use her own bath this evening too. First, he had to select a body wash. Very helpful, all red bottles had exactly that written on their label followed by a number. Of course, Twila made her own body washes and other lotions. She was a witch after all. Joshua wouldn't expect any less. Now, what had Twila said? He should avoid the coral red bottle? What exactly did coral red look like? A little confused, Joshua went with one that was more pinkish orange than red. If it wasn't very red, then it probably wasn't named coral red. Soaping up felt nice. And whatever Twila had put in it certainly made his skin silky smooth. Joshua somehow felt cheated by products aimed at men. If those for women had such an effect, he might switch to female stuff for good. Of course, he paid special attention to the small budding breasts. Still a strange feeling, but he started to get used to them. They were his third pair after all. Not his first rodeo. He used the body wash for all of his body, including his face, paying special attention to not getting it into his hair. That really needed a haircut. Maybe some of his next paycheck should go into that. Not just clothes. But after the body wash, Joshua was curious if the shampoo was equally as good. But reaching out, he hesitated. What color was fuchsia again? Twila said it was a shade of purple. Yet one of the bottles was hardly purple, more pinkish. And its label marked it as shampoo. Probably the safest bet. Messaging the shampoo in, Joshua needed a moment to notice a slight burning sensation. Maybe he had grabbed the wrong bottle after all. Or maybe he was allergic to one of the ingredients. It was a homemade shampoo after all. Rinsing it out a little early, Joshua turned to the conditioners. Only to hesitate again. What kind of green was honeydew again? He thought it was named after a melon. And melons to him were dark green. Selecting a pale green, he thought he might be good on that front. Just lathering it in lessened the burning sensation. But after a minute, he felt some tingling. And a slight itching. Was he allergic to all of them? Washing it all out, he stepped out to dry off, nearly cussing out loud. That towel was so soft it practically glided over his skin. That, he decided, he could get used to. Doing the bathrobe, Joshua stepped out. Twila, I think I might be allergic to one of your shampoos. Kinda feels itchy. Twila looked up at him and burst out laughing. It took her a long time to calm down, while Joshua stood there confused and scratching his scalp. Didn't I tell you to not use the fuchsia shampoo? And I think you used the honeydew conditioner too. I am not good with colors, Joshua admitted sheepishly. Red is red and green is green. And they looked like safe bets. What happens now? Will my hair fall out? Twila gave another chuckle before answering. The opposite actually. Both are hair growth potions. Just mixed into my shampoo and conditioner. I fear you might be in for a rough night. That hair of you will sprout like weeds. Oh, just great. Exactly what he needed. The opposite of a haircut. Even longer hair to annoy him. Twila gave him a strange look and then got up to take a closer look at Joshua. Only to burst out into new laughter. Speaking of growing hair. Looks like we need to grow you new eyebrows. What? Joshua reached for his brows and only found smooth skin. Oh, damn. That grows back, right? Sure. Twila gave him very assuring nodding and barely concealed laughter. You just used my get ready for summer body wash. Slightly enhanced by magic for maximum depilatory effect. Keeps one smooth for nearly 3 months. I can't run around without eyebrows for 3 months. Beard either, Twila added. Upon his glare, he relented. Nothing a little coral red and honeydew can't fix. Come on. Time to grow you new eyebrows. And eyelashes. As Joshua awoke, he had to admit that Twila had been right. Who would have guessed that pillows with boobs would be this comfortable? If it just hadn't been for that itchy scalp, it would have been perfect. Sitting up, his head felt oddly heavy. Then he saw hair. So much hair. Quickly standing up, his new mane of hair fell down. Past his hips. Oh, shit. He was close to panicking, but then reminded himself that mankind had invented a brilliant thing called scissors. He could always cut off most of it. Maybe Twila was gifted to give him a halfway decent haircut. Couldn't be worse than what he'd manage. Eyebrows. Joshua remembered and felt above his eyes. His stomach dropped. That felt awfully bushy. He needed a mirror. See the damage done. Joshua rushed to the bathroom. His reflection was waiting. Twila! His shout was half in anger and half in panic. Oh, he had eyebrows. They sprouted inches off his face, like some antenna of an alien. And his eyelashes were at least 2 inches. Definitely not cool. Twila better fixes that too. And don't she dare laugh at him too much. Miss? Miss, you forgot your peas. Joshua stopped. Was the cashier talking to him? Turning around, Joshua indeed saw the cashier hold up the small can of peas. One he apparently forgot to pack. Blushing, Joshua was quick to grab the can and put it to the rest of his purchases. A quick thanks and he rushed out of the supermarket. Had he really just been mistaken for a woman? Joshua glanced down. No, it couldn't be his breasts. He had just switched to his 4th pair. No one would notice them unless he ran around shirtless. With the jacket, it was even less likely. Maybe that was the culprit. He had borrowed the jacket from Twila. His own had been lost in the eviction. One of the items he missed grabbing in the rush. It was still a sore topic for him to talk about or even to think about. Then again, the jacket wasn't that feminine. Speaking of feminine, the products Twila asked him to buy for her probably didn't help. He felt like stepping into forbidden territory when entering the female hygiene aisle. Rarely had he sported a blush that was this deep of embarrassment. The truth was, he was probably overthinking it. The culprit was his hair. Joshua wanted to cut it off, but Twila had been over the moon about how luscious and silken it had turned out. She had argued for him to keep it. Joshua was determined to get rid of it until Twila resorted to a language he loved to hear. A deal was struck. $100 if he kept it for a month. Now he cursed her for appealing to his greedy side. At least, he had bartered it down to waist length. More than once he had sat down on it when it still reached past his butt. An annoyance he could do without. Of course, his face was another sore spot. There wasn't even a hint of beard stubble on his skin, leaving it baby smooth. The only facial hair he got were eyelashes and eyebrows. Both of them had been Twila's work. They had turned out so girly. Granted, they needed a trim after his accident and he probably would have done a much worse job. But both were rather feminine in appearance. Twila argued she had no experience shaping eyebrows for men. Joshua had to admit she had a point there. Still, something in him suspected Twila couldn't help herself tweaking it slightly towards the feminine on purpose. The whole morning she had a grand old time having fun at his expense. And he couldn't really fault her for it. He had messed up. Big time. At least, it was a temporary situation. He was ready to put the topic aside when the greedy part of his mind spoke up. Maybe he should embrace it. If he could pass for a woman, then he could get away with raising breasts to a bigger size. It would mean a larger payout. Joshua shook his head. That shampoo had really messed with his mind in more ways than one. For a moment, Joshua had hoped. 2 weeks into his stay with Twila, he had started to send out applications again. One had even resulted in an interview. The very same he now trotted away from. Still, it was progress. At least, that's what he told himself. Twila would be disappointed too. She had been hyped for him. Now, she would share his disappointment. The very thought made him smile a little. Twila was 100% the doting mother hen type who would try to cheer him up as soon as he would come home. Maybe there was a yummy pie or cake in his future. That was a silver lining that blew away most of the dark clouds. As he neared their homes, Joshua had talked himself into high spirits. A minor setback. He had worse before and shouldn't let it ruin his mood. However, one glance at his apartment building pulled the rug from under his feet. Police cruisers blocked the road to both sides and police officers rolled out a yellow tape. Smack in the middle of the cordoned-off zone was Joshua's apartment building. With a hole in his stomach, Joshua walked over to the other spectators. "What's going on?" he asked the closest officer manning the perimeter. The guy shrugged. "Not supposed to say anything, but I don't really know either. Some kind of raid. If I had to guess, illegal substances." Just then, a black SUV arrived. It was let through and 4 women stepped out. Joshua had heard of the Men in Black, like the movie franchise too. However, he had never heard of women in black with expertly tailored suits and fedoras that looked a bit too pointy than normal. Together, they walked into the building. His first reaction had been that somehow, he had gotten into trouble again. Now, he feared for Twila. What had she been involved in? He suddenly spotted her. Flanked by 2 of the suited women, Twila was escorted towards the SUV. As she noticed him, she gave him a slight shake of her head. Whatever was going on, he should stay out of it. The black SUV drove off. It was soon replaced by an equally black truck. The agents of whatever agency had raided this place walked out with an unending stream of boxes, all loaded onto the truck. After hours, Joshua could swear the feds had cleaned out the whole apartment. The truck rolled away and the cops removed the tape. 10 minutes later, the road was cleared and nothing remained that even hinted at the raid. Worried, Joshua had his way into the building. He half expected the door to Twila's apartment sealed off with crime scene tape. But nothing even hinted at anything untoward. His key still fitted in, and he slipped in before anyone could show up. Like a certain landlord. At first, nothing sprang at Joshua that was wrong or changed. The hallway was the same, as was the kitchen and living room. The reading parlor looked like the aftermath of a Black Friday sale. Most of the curios in the bookshelves were gone and just a half-dozen books remained. It was a pitiful view. The bathroom was the same. Except, something was missing. Upon closer examination, Joshua noticed most of the body wash, shampoo, and conditioner bottles had been removed. This didn't bode well. On his way to his room, Joshua found the door to Twila's library open. It was utterly empty. No breast, tit, or sweater puppy remained. They were all gone. Just the blank tiles remained. His own room wasn't better. Stripped of everything that even vaguely looked like a breast. Even his pillows were now utterly normal. Looking into the dresser, Joshua could see all his belongings. Now that no breasts crowded it, his possessions looked even more sparse inside the dresser. "Just what have you gotten yourself into, Twila?" he asked the room. To his surprise, there was an answer. A sudden flash of light and then a letter fluttered down on his bed. It was addressed to him. Dreading what he would find, he opened the envelope nonetheless. "Dear Joshua, I hope this letter finds you. I used an old trick from school times to hide it for you. The most important thing first, don't panic. I've been raided by the CWC, the Central Witch Council. Not my first time, I must admit. They like to do that sometimes. Little saber rattling to keep us witches, who don't belong to a coven, in line. I'll probably be gone for a month or 2. Probably have some kind of community outreach program in my immediate future. To get me back on track again. Practically a slap on the wrist. If it should take longer after all, then don't worry. The apartment is paid for a year in advance, and if money runs tight, there are a few $1,000 under my mattress that you can use. Of course, whatever you take you have to work off later. I have to go. See you soon, Twila." It still sounded bad. Just not as bad as Joshua had feared. Twila had mentioned that she was a failed witch. Whatever that meant, he had never dared to ask. But at least her absence wasn't that long. With a sigh, he let himself fall onto his bed, only to have it feel off. He had gotten used to the soft fabric breasts on his pillow. Now, he had to do without. "Damn it, Twila," Joshua cursed. This was not the deal. Of course, his roommate and friend couldn't reply. She wasn't even here. Joshua was looking again into the reflection of the hallway mirror. They were noticeable. Jacket and all. They still pushed through. "Just wait a month or 2, Joshua mimicked Twila. Nothing to it. Sure, your breasts keep growing, but what about it? It's not like they stick out on a guy like you. The problem was that he needed to get outside. He was out of toilet paper and food was running low too. Joshua also knew that he had to go now. Yes, his breasts were noticeable, but barely. He dreaded how large they would be the next week. Or the one after. And if Twila was really gone for 2 months, Joshua didn't even want to think about that. Right now, he still might pass as a guy. Then his mind flashed back to his last shopping experience. Maybe he should lean into it? Dress up as a woman. Looking closer into the mirror, Joshua thought he might be able to pull it off. Had his face always looked this feminine, or was that just the absence of his beard? He might as well try. Going into Twila's room felt a little like a breach of privacy. Yet Joshua was sure she wouldn't mind under the circumstances. With a pounding heart, Joshua opened her dressers. He had no idea where to start. Joshua was the first to admit that his fashion sense was abysmal. Maybe if he mimicked Twila? In the past week leading up to the raid, Joshua had seen her in plenty of outfits. She often even asked his opinion. A task he especially liked when she wore a larger pair of breasts. Now he racked his brain for an outfit that might fit him. The silver lining was that their size and figure weren't that different. Her clothing might be ill-fitting on him, but they might fit. Oh, hell. He spotted a top and a skirt he had seen Twila wear together. A part of him wanted to flee, but practicality won. Stripping out of his clothes, Joshua went for the skirt. It fit. Granted, his butt wasn't filling it out as much as Twila's did, but he doubted anyone would point it out. The only trouble was that Joshua had never worn a skirt before. The top was worse than Joshua remembered. Its collar had a deep cutout. Wearing it, everyone would see Joshua's budding breasts. Dreading the worst, he still tried it. Taking a deep breath, he turned towards the mirror. The reflection shocked him. It was actually serviceable. He looked more like a woman than a man. Yes, to pull off the top properly, he'd have to fill it out a little more. The irony that it just needed a week's time wasn't lost on him. But for now, he had an idea. Going for Twila's underwear felt like breaking an even bigger taboo. Just opening the drawers felt like he might summon Twila and her wrath on him. Which was actually fine with him. At least then, she would be home. Bras. Twila had a lot of them. In all kinds of cup sizes. A necessity when one switches between different bosoms with the help of magic. One section made him laugh. Twila actually had push-up bras for the smaller cup sizes. It looked like she had her small little points of pride too. Choosing one at random, Joshua tried it on. Of course, it didn't fit. It took him 4 more tries to sift out one that did. The push-up bra felt strange. So far, Joshua had always dismissed his breasts as not big enough to count. But now, he had a proper bosom. There was no denying it. And slipping the top on again only highlighted the fact. He actually thought it looked halfway decent. No one would guess he was a guy. It actually hurt his male pride only a little. Part of him was excited to see his new reflection. As if he was doing something forbidden with no one being the wiser. Still, something was missing. Makeup? Joshua eyed Twila's vanity. His friend usually wore understated makeup. Even that would be beyond his skill. Lipstick. He probably could pull off lipstick. His first few tries were bad. Both in application and color choice. Then he nailed it. A muted pink that only highlighted his lips slightly. No smudges this time too. And somehow, even just this little change, the reflection staring back looked more feminine. I really can do it, Joshua whispered. I can pass as a woman. Of course, the real test was stepping outside. And he didn't just have an excuse to do so, but the necessity. Joshua slipped into the jacket again that he had borrowed a few times from Twila. This time, he didn't close it up completely, showing off his bosom as if it would make his whole outfit more legitimate. In a way, it was exactly that. Just a quick trip to the supermarket, Joshua assured himself. Nervous, but excited too, he left the apartment. As always, every step of the staircase creaked under his steps, especially as Joshua hurried to get downstairs. It was this haste that carried him into the reach of his former landlord, Mr. Kasiragi. Praying to whomever, Joshua pushed past, only to have his hopes squashed. "Excuse me, Mississippi." Oh, no. What if he was recognized? Slowly, Joshua turned around. "Yes? I haven't seen you before," Mr. Kasiragi explained. "Are you visiting?" The first relief of not being recognized made way for anger. What business was it of his former landlord who he was? Still, Joshua reminded himself that he shouldn't burn any bridges. In a way, he got a once-over with Mr. Kasiragi. Joshua tried to think hard and fast. Something usually mutually exclusive. Jessica. Everyone calls me Jessie though. I am, house sitting. Well, apartment sitting. My aunt needed to get away for a while. So, I am manning the fort for Twila. Miss White Creek? Kasiragi asked. Then nodded, looking very pleased. I guess she kicked out that good-for-nothing bum, after all. You are a White Creek too? Joshua nodded, not trusting his voice right now. He wouldn't have minded putting that smarmy ass of a landlord in his place. Instead, a nod had to do. Well, then, let me welcome you to the building. The landlord even gave a small bow. I am sure we will see each other from time to time. Certainly, Joshua managed to press out, then took a hasty exit. Pushing out of the building, Joshua took some deep breaths. That had been a close call. He still couldn't quite believe he had gotten away with it. Has he really changed that much? He was sure Kasiragi would call him out. Then again, half the time the landlord had stared at Joshua's bosom. About time you girls pulled your weight, he whispered to his endowment. There was another thing that bothered Joshua. Yes, his body looked a lot differently. But what about his voice? Surely it was still recognizable. He had, on instinct, raised the pitch a little. But that couldn't make that much of a difference, right? Joshua vowed to research the topic. Surely there would be videos out there on how to talk like a woman. The walk to the supermarket only 3 blocks away was rather eventless. The same couldn't be said for the supermarket. He got plenty of looks. Most were appreciative, a few lecherous. Let me help you with that, one shopper offered as Joshua reached higher up on the shelf. He still could reach it, if barely. But the man was faster. He didn't even wait for Joshua to say if he needed help. Murmuring a hasty thanks, Joshua pushed his cart away, oddly bemused by the interaction. He felt oddly underestimated, as if the very thought he might be fine on his own was wrong to others, just because he looked like a woman. Or maybe they just jumped at the opportunity in the hopes of a reward? That wasn't much better in Joshua's opinion. Still, deep down, part of him liked it. The attention and the fact that someone got out of their way to do something for him. Despite this one occurrence, shopping itself was a drag. His and Twila's pantry really had been run dry. There was plenty in need of stocking up. In turn, his cart filled up fast. Only when Joshua reached the cashier, he started to suspect he had a problem. Plastic bag after plastic bag was filled with goods. None of them were really big. In the end, Joshua stood a little lost with over a dozen of the darn things and wondered how to get them home. May I offer you help to get these to your car? Joshua turned to find the same young man before him that had first mistaken him for a woman weeks prior. Now, he looked quite eager to help Joshua out again. I don't have a car, Joshua admitted eventually, blushing slightly in embarrassment. It's okay. One way or another I'll get these home. It's not that far away, I hope? Just 3 blocks, Joshua replied and immediately wondered why he volunteered all these pieces of information. Have you heard of our new delivery service? For large purchases like these, it would be ideal. He beamed at Joshua, who wondered what good that information would be. If he had known before, it would be a different matter. But the clerk wasn't finished. If it is just 3 blocks, I could give you a lift. As a freebie, so to speak. If anyone asks, it would be to advertise our new service. Joshua's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't need help from some horn-dog shopping clerk. Then again, how was he supposed to get all these bags home? Haul them in stages? A few meters at a time? Or borrow a shopping cart and rattle it down the street like some maniac? Thanks. Joshua tried to give a coy smile. Not too much. He didn't want to give the wrong impression. I would appreciate it. Another beaming smile, and he picked up most of Joshua's bags. Follow me, Mississippi. They went outside and the clerk went straight for a car with the colors of the supermarket. The trunk was filled and Joshua got to sit down on the passenger seat. I'm Anthony, by the way, he introduced himself to Joshua just as they pulled out of the parking lot. Joshua didn't really want to know what the A&A Blackburn stood on Anthony's name tag. But since he was getting a lift, he might as well play nice. Jessica. Friends call me Jessie. A pleasure meeting you, Jessie, Anthony said with another damned beaming smile. Oh, sorry. May I call you Jessie? Sure. Sooner or later, Joshua would return to his normal self again, and then he could ditch the Jessie/Jessica persona altogether. Right now, he looked forward to it. The drive wasn't long, and together, the many bags were easily heaved up the few flights of stairs to Joshua's shared apartment. Now, his ordeal was over. Or so he thought. This is a flyer for our new service, Anthony said while producing one from somewhere like a stage magician. However, instead of handing it over, he scrawled a number on it. And my number. Just in case you have any personal questions about the service. Thanks. Joshua gave a weak smile. Had he misheard or had the word personal slightly overemphasized? I'll be sure to call. If I need more groceries. Goodbye, Jessie. And then, he was gone, and Joshua collapsed against the door. This had been an adventure. One that was oddly illuminating and exciting in some ways. One thing was for sure, Joshua had a lot to learn about being a woman. And if Twila didn't hurry up, he would be forced to learn too. Worried, Joshua looked into the mirror. This was getting out of hand. Literally. Once, he had been able to hide his breasts by just slightly cupping them with his hands. But they continued to grow. They started to peek out. Then Joshua was only able to hold and cover 2/3 of them. Now, if he cupped them, he couldn't even cover his own nipples. And that was after 1 month of Twila's absence. Potentially there was another month ahead of him. Twila really needed to hurry up and get home. At least, I don't need a push-up bra anymore to show some cleavage. Now he had plenty. In fact, if this was going on, he might need to look for ways to minimize or downplay his endowment. Shaking his head, Joshua grabbed for the delivery box. It had been silly to order it. An unnecessary purchase. And soon, it wouldn't fit anymore anyway. Opening it up, Joshua mused that he spent a little too much time watching influencers for makeup and dress-up tips. They all gushed about this new intimate collection by the rapper Lil Lin. Now, Joshua could find out if the hype was warranted. The bra revealed certainly looked high quality. A little elongated, but not quite long enough to count as a bustier. The material used was soft and quite nice to feel. Of course, the big draw was the stitching that closely mimicked tattoo art. Rumor was that a few of the designs were actually copied off of Lil Lin's own tattoos. The bra itself was pretty comfortable once Joshua slipped it on. He was by no means an expert yet on female underwear, but this bra got his seal of approval. The cups were maybe a little too big for him. Nothing the growths of a few days couldn't fix. The ringing of the doorbell interrupted Joshua's thoughts. Coming, he yelled before hastily slipping into a blouse. It was too early for another grocery delivery. That was scheduled for the day after tomorrow. Probably one of Twila's clients again. In the past few weeks, some of Twila's customers had come by. worried by the lack of communication. By now, Joshua had experienced letting them down gently, stating that Twila had some legal trouble and would be away for a while, that everything would be okay once she got back, that the Central Witch Council had confiscated all breasts was a fact that Joshua wisely kept to himself. Opening the door, Joshua was ready to give his usual spiel, but the woman standing there didn't really look like she needed Twila's help. She had a full bosom. Unlike those who had given Twila their breasts for growing, those had been flat as a board. "Can I help you?" The woman gave him a cheeky grin. "Joshua, right? Sorry, I guess you go by Jessica now. Or Jessie. Don't worry. I am here to help. My name is Colette, a friend of Twila's." "Oh, thank God," slipped past Joshua's lips. "Can you get rid of these? Your breasts?" Colette looked apoplectic. "I am afraid it won't be that easy. Might I explain?" "Inside?" Joshua hesitated. This Colette did appear a little suspect to him. Twila had never mentioned her. But what choice did he have? He was growing increasingly worried. In fact, it closely followed the growth of the assets on his chest. "Sure," Joshua relented. "Come in." A little while later, they sat both in Twila's reading parlor, sipping on tea. Joshua took the opportunity to study Colette. She was a woman who didn't stand out much. Blonde hair with tiny curls that were cut into a page style and reached to her neck. Blue eyes and a sprinkle of freckles on her nose and cheeks. The rest was average. Nothing out to him especially. It was as if Colette represented a median estimate of all Caucasian women aged 25 to 35. "So, how do you know Twila?" "Oh, you know. Old friends." Colette took a deliberate sip of her tea. "Studied magic together. Were apprentices under the same tutors." "So, you are a witch," Joshua confirmed. "But you can't help me with my little problem." "Sorry, I am afraid not." She did not sound sorry to Joshua. "When I gave Twila the spell, I hadn't time to study it myself. It was a rather complex spell and would have taken ages to copy. In all honesty, I was surprised Twila managed to learn it at all. She was never the best at complex spells like these." "I bet the physical copy of the spell was taken in the raid too," Joshua mused aloud. Then fixed Colette with his gaze. "So, she got the spell from you. Why? It is rather unusual, I take it. Not something a normal witch would study." Yes, it is. You see, Twila had fallen on hard times. Again. She always had been a troublemaker. At least for the higher-ups of witch society. Twila isn't the greatest witch. Her magical potential is barely enough to grant her that status. But what she got, she was pretty creative with. She always could find an unusual application of magic and find customers who would pay for it. Colette gave a shrug. Usually mundane ones. That's what put her on the shit list of the higher-ups time and time again. We witches aren't supposed to let mundanes know that magic exists. But yeah, if anyone could make money from a spell like that, it would be Twila. Joshua was annoyed. Not really with Colette, but with the overall situation. "So, long story short, you can't help me. Only Twila can. And it is up in the air when she will be back out of Xing Xing or whatever you witches use as a prison. I wouldn't say I am completely useless." With a smirk and a flourish, Colette withdrew a manila envelope from behind her back. Where she had hidden it before, Joshua couldn't tell. The answer was probably magic. She handed it over. "I took the liberty to prepare something." Now intrigued, Joshua opened it up. The 2 bundles of cash looked like $5,000 each were a welcome sight, but not what really caught his attention. He fished out a social ID, driving license, and a passport. All in the name of Jessica White Creek. They even had a picture of his feminized self on them. "How did you dash Scrang's spell plus a simulacrum?" Colette cut him off, then stood up. "Not that complicated. Listen. I wish I could stay and chat, but I am afraid I have to leave. The Central Witch Council may lock up Twila for a month or two now and then, but my beef with them runs a bit deeper. If they get their hands on me, I am afraid I would never see the stars of the night sky again. Thank you. Joshua even offered his hand. Colette wasn't the solution to his problem, but she had been helpful after all. They shook and then Colette had her way out of the apartment. Only once she was out of the building, Joshua developed a few doubts. Just how exactly did Colette know he was going by Jesse or Jessica? Or that he once mentioned to Mr. Kasiragi that he, as Jesse, was Twila's niece? Doubt returned, but for now, Joshua could do nothing about it. Joshua awoke after another restless night. The sun was up and he doubted he could fall asleep again. Another day beckoned with the faint hope that Twila would finally show up. By now, Joshua was more than a bit peeved. 1 or 2 months his ass. It's been 4. Grabbing his massive tits, he heaved himself and them up. Another summer night meant another sweaty mess. It had been fine when he had sported a D cup. Or even F cup. Now, he didn't even want to know what cup size he was. Or if the charts even went up that high. At least, he wasn't as big as that Twila on that fateful day she pulled him into her secret. By now, he started to regret ever agreeing to this madness. Soon, he would be bigger. And one day, he might not even be able to get up anymore. Weighted down by his own breasts. Getting to the bathroom was an exercise in frequent breaks and finding furniture to misuse as pedestals for his breasts. Eventually arriving, Joshua stripped out of his PJs. The pants of them at least. The top didn't fit anymore in the first place. Using the toilet was another painful reminder that his body was changing. Joshua hadn't noticed it at first, but now it was plain to see. His member couldn't even be called Little Joshua anymore. More like minuscule Joshua. But there were other changes. After 4 months, his body hair should have returned. Yet he was still baby smooth. Cleaning up, Joshua heaved his chestal anchors over to the sink. "Good morning, Jessica," he greeted his reflection. By now, he could hardly see his old self anymore. More critical extermination revealed that it was time to trim his eyebrows again. He could swear their growth was still accelerated. Every 2 weeks, he had to trim them down because they started to get bushy. By now, he had become an expert in shaping them. A do-it-yourself haircut would be on his agenda soon too. Once again, it was encroaching on his butt area. Grabbing a washcloth, Joshua started to clean up his sweater monster puppies. It would give him an hour or 2 of relief from excessive boob sweat. The hardest part to reach was the crease under each breast. The transition between tit flesh and ribcage. Did I get crumbs stuck in the fold? Joshua tried to lift his right tit with one arm and dug into the crease with his other hand. Joshua nearly lost his balance as a huge shift occurred. Confused, he looked down at his right breast. He held it in his arms, detached from his chest. Astonished, he let the fleshy mass fall into the sink. He barely registered that it fused to the porcelain, making the sink nearly unusable. He had tried before, in the first few weeks after Twila's incarceration, then given up. But now, he was free of one of them. Would it work with the other 2? He had to try. With the same ease as the first one, the tit came off. Joshua let it fall and it landed on the other, fusing to it weirdly. Tit on tit. Like some abstract art. Joshua didn't care. "I am free," he shouted again and again. Running naked through the apartment. Enjoying how light he felt. Unencumbered after months of being dragged down. Jumping up and down. Whooping and hollering until a neighbor knocked on the floor from below with a broomstick. Only then, he calmed down. Still kind of in shock, Joshua returned to the bathroom. Staring at the altered sink. Maybe now, his body would return to normal. He sure hoped so. For the sake of his dick. But now what? Buy a new sink? Maybe. Provided he couldn't get those breasts unfused from the porcelain too. Joshua tried and the top breast came off without a hitch. Placing it nipple down prevented another fusion accident. The second came off just as easy. Now, Joshua had to find a place for them. Grinning, he grabbed the first one and heaved it back to his bedroom. It landed heavily on his pillow, then turned to fabric and stuffing before his eyes. A quick trip later, he had a bosom pillow again, though this time, the bosom was a tad bigger. Sleeping on that, I might be smothered in my sleep, he mused aloud. A week later, Joshua stared at the same mammoth tits, once again detached from his pillow. Just looking at them filled him with dread. He just had gotten rid of them and now he was about to reattach them. Stupid lies, Joshua murmured. It was time, and he knew it. Soon, his weekly grocery delivery would arrive, probably brought by Anthony again. And he would expect a Jessie at the door with massive tits. Why? Because he had to tell a stupid lie to explain his ever-growing breasts. The hormone imbalance story wasn't that far off. His body looked like he had been on hormone replacement therapy for a year now. The chronic illness that caused continuous breast growth sounded like a good idea at the time. Now, he had to keep the lie going. Just for an hour, Joshua promised himself he could ditch them as soon as the delivery was done. Picking up one, Joshua could swear it grew heavier, despite knowing that they were exactly the same since last week. Lining it up, Joshua pressed the massive tit against his chest and nothing happened. Confused, he tried a few more times. Maybe the alignment was off. When nothing helped, Joshua tried the other one. The result didn't change. Joshua was still bosomless. He scratched his head. Something must have changed. Maybe without him, the enchantment had disappeared? Yet fusing to everywhere else still worked. Just not on his chest. Looking down, his chest appeared ready. His original small nipples and the rest were flat as a board. Nearly. Joshua frowned. His chest actually reminded him of the time Twila first attached one of those underdeveloped breasts to him. Just a little bit of flap. Barely noticeable. But that couldn't be it, right? Hesitant, Joshua placed his fingers at the lower end of the slightly cushioned area. Then he peeled. His eyes grew wide as it worked. First, he removed a breast from his right side. Maybe the mass of a sunny side-up egg. The left followed. I am growing new breasts. For a moment, Joshua was excited. He had to admit, part of him liked having breasts. Before they became monstrous abnormalities. The prospect of maybe growing a decent size just for old time's sake was surprisingly appealing. But then his mind caught up. He could forget about ever returning to be Joshua and might as well accept being Jessica for the rest of his life. If his body grew more feminine as long as he grew breasts and every pair of breasts immediately gave way for the next pair, then it would never stop. Much less reverse. It wasn't the end of the world, Joshua knew. In the past months, he had gotten used to being Jessie, finding more and more aspects of being a woman that he liked. Realizing it probably wouldn't be reversible at least, without the help of Twila had some finality to it. Maybe now he was forced to make a cut. Let being Joshua go. She decided. No more Joshua. She was Jessica now and forever. Because deep down, she might not have turned back when Twila showed up on their doorstep right this moment. Of course, Jessie wasn't done here. Anthony was still on his way to deliver some groceries for her. It meant she had to fuse those giant globes of mammary flesh to her after all. Her new budding breasts found a temporary home on her hallway mirror, giving the reflection a strange dented-out look. Then, the moment of truth was upon her. Once again, Jessica lifted a breast up and held it to her chest. This time, it fused just fine. The second followed a moment later. I did not miss this in the least, Jessie hissed between gritted teeth. Hopefully, Anthony would hurry up, so that she could get rid of these monsters once again. Or else, her back might be killer this evening. Jessie was nervous. Applying the finishing touches of makeup once again. She had done so 3 times already and then changed her mind. Now, she stood back and admired her reflection. Her outfit was made for flirting, but not so much that it slid into the area of being slutty. Perfect. Just what she needed for this evening. She was ready for her date. Stepping back, she glanced at her clock. Jessie groaned as she saw that there was still an hour left. In her eagerness to be on time, she had started early. Lately, the more she got into makeup and fashion, her dress-up sessions lengthened. The ringing of the doorbell brought a smile to her face. It looked like she wasn't the only one looking forward to the date and was a little overeager. With a skip to her step, she hurried to the door, only to stop and smooth out her skirt. She wanted to look perfect for Anthony. Opening up, her flirty smile and prepared teasing monologue slipped Jessica's mind. "Colette?" The witch looked her up and down. "Do I come at an inopportune time?" "A little," Jessie admitted, but then waved the witch in. "I've got an hour." "I won't be staying that long," Colette remarked while making her way to the reading parlor. Jessica knew that to be true. Colette never stayed long. In the nearly 2 years she knew the witch, Colette had never stayed longer than half an hour. It was a rare occasion too. Every 2 to 3 months. She wouldn't count Colette as a friend, but as an acquaintance on friendly terms. With her, Jessie could speak openly. The only person to do so. "I see you redecorated further," Colette remarked as Jessie joined her with a tray of iced tea and glasses. Jessica looked around. She didn't read as much as Twila, and what else was she to do? The original breast library was full of her newly grown and detached breasts. Hence, she needed a new place to store them. She had thought the reading parlor had plenty of empty shelf space. Now, she started to realize she was wrong. Over half of the shelves were already full of bosoms. "I've got no choice," Jessica admitted. A little annoyance crept into her voice. "They keep growing faster. I am up to 450 grams a day. Each, Colette. Each." One of Colette's earliest suggestions had been to weigh her breasts each day, to find out how fast they grew. That was surprisingly easy if one could peel their breasts off. At first, their growth only had been about 24 grams. That was 1.5 years ago. "That's why I tell you to sell more of them," Colette reminded her once again. "Or you might drown in breasts in here." Jessie frowned. Sure enough, she had taken over Twila's business. Plenty of former customers had reached out in time, and now, Jessica was slowly working her way down the list. "I already find 2 in a month risky." Jessica was not happy with the topic. It always led to debates between the two of them. Again. "I am trying to stay under the radar of the CWC. Not making the mistakes Twila did. I don't want to be hauled off by witches showing up on my doorstep." "Have you heard of Twila?" As Jessica shook her head, Colette doubled down. "That's why I urge you to diversify. Spread out your market. Go globally. Just ship them off and rake the money in." She could use the money. Jessica had taken over the apartment, and having such a big place all by herself wasn't cheap either. The few pairs of bosoms made her barely break even. She liked selling large bosoms. For those, she could demand more money and actually bank a little. Of course, Jessica had dismissed going globally before. "I told you, one misaligned breast and a customer would make up a stink. I could peel it off. Twila could. No one else. And if the customer is in another country, I'd never be able to afford to give customer service." Colette rolled her eyes. Clearly not agreeing. One way or another, you need to get rid of them. Now, it was Jessica's time to shine. "Would you like a slice of melon?" Before Colette could answer, Jessica stood up and walked out of the room, just to return with a melon on a plate. It's honeydew melon. Surprisingly light green for a melon, right? Very sweet, but kind of small. Jessica held up her finger to indicate she wasn't finished. Going over to a shelf, she selected one of the larger bosoms. On her frame, it would amount to a D-cup in size. Peeling them off, the breasts returned from a wooden state to a normal fleshy and squishy form. Not for long, as Jessica used both to fuse them to the honeydew melon. then slicing into it with a large knife, revealing that inside, there now was even more flesh of the fruit. "Ta-da!" she exclaimed, getting rid of excess breasts one bite at a time. "And it saves on the grocery bill." "Slice?" Colette didn't answer. Thoughtful, she looked at the bisected fruit. "Are you sure that is safe? How long have you been doing that? Maybe that's why you are growing faster and faster." Digesting the same spell over and over. For a moment, Jessica looked worried, then visibly relaxed. "Nah. I've been doing this for only the last half year." It wouldn't explain why the growth accelerated. Besides, I think once the form is destroyed, the magic goes away instead of going for a slice. Colette took one of the halves, looking it critically over. "You are right. Can't feel a trace of magic anymore." She suddenly stood up and walked over to one of the shelves. "Interesting. These lack magic too. Jessica, are you up for an experiment?" Jessica shrugged. "If it doesn't take too long, sure." Colette came back to the table and replaced the half of the melon, then pressed them together so they appeared whole again. "Try peeling it off." "That won't work," Jessica pointed out. "You said it yourself. The magic is gone." Colette just looked at her, waiting. With a sigh, Jessica tried. To her surprise, the breast came off the melon. Despite being sliced through before, it was now whole again. "Knew it," Colette exclaimed. "It might be gone from the breasts, but not from you, girl. I wonder if your gift works on breasts that have never been flesh before." Jessica shrugged, sitting back down. Colette did the same but suddenly sported a cat-like grin. "Enough with that magic stuff. Why do you look ready for a night out in town?" Jessie blushed. "Maybe because I have a date? With that grocer guy? What was his name? Anton?" "Anthony," Jessica corrected. "And, yes, it will be our first date." "Good for you. But doesn't he expect a little bit more on top?" "I told him I had them surgically removed. Not ready yet to tell all that magic stuff. He thinks I am wearing prosthetic inserts now." "I bet." Colette leaned a bit forward. "Say, how far do you want to go? Does Anthony know about your you-know?" Jessica frowned. "About what?" "Between your legs," Colette whispered as if they could be overheard. "What?" "Oh." Now Jessica understood her. "Didn't I tell you?" "I could swear I did." "Tell me what?" "Shrank. Shrank. Shrank. Gone." Kept going, through. Deeper. Deeper. "And Tada. I am a complete woman. I could swear I told you." "Seriously, haven't I complained to you about having periods now?" "Really thought I did. It's been a year now." "No, you didn't." Colette sounded a bit miffed, then brightened up. "Congrats. Come here. Give a sister a hug." "A whole year? Kinda surprising. That wasn't part of the spell I gave Twila." Jessica shrugged. "Yeah, just keep magic away from me. I still don't have a single hair on my body except for my head of hair and eyebrows. Because of one time using enchanted body wash. And speaking of, my hair growth is still accelerated too. Just not as drastic as the first night. Else, you might want to call me Rapunzel. Just be glad you ain't living in a tower," Colette started. "Else your delivery boy lover might skip you on his route." Jessica took the joke in stride. Even beamed. "Actually, he got promoted to assistant manager." "Well, congratulations to him," Colette said without missing a beat. "I better get going. You can go to your Romeo and gift yourself as a gift for his promotion." "Colette!" Despite her outburst and slight blush, Jessica gave her a hug. "Don't be a stranger." "I'll try," the witch promised as she slipped out of the door. The same day, a few hours later, Jessica was practically dancing through the park. She had a fantastic date and later a romantic walk through the same park she was walking through home now. Anthony had been a gentleman and understood that even after walking him home, Jessica was reluctant to stay over. It was their first date after all. Of course, there was another reason Jessica bailed on Anthony. She still hadn't told him about her magic gift, even though it felt sometimes like a curse. When she had headed out, Jessica had worn a slightly oversized bra. By now, her breasts had grown enough to be pinched by the same garment. She stopped in front of a bronze statue and tried to adjust her bosom a little. Of course, it was in vain. Slightly peeved, she let out her anger on the statue. "What are you looking at? Jealous with your bites of breasts? Wishing you had the real deal?" Giggling, Jessie was ready to move on, when a different idea struck. Colette had suggested she try removing a breast that had never been flesh before. Now was the perfect opportunity. Making first sure she was alone, Jessica climbed onto the statue's pedestal. The statue itself was made out of bronze, and Jessica could see that she wasn't the first to visit. The statue's breasts were discolored from the many hands that touched them. They lay bare and were probably this tiny to not cause a ruckus with conservatives. Giggling to herself, Jessica got to work. At first, nothing happened. But after about 5 seconds, they slowly turned to flesh and started to peel away. Triumphant, Jessie held her bounty high. "Got yours," she teased the statue. "Oh, all sad now? Here, hold these." Jessica peeled off her own breasts and deftly placed them on the statue. Having gained a bosom one could be proud of, the statue now looked quite naughty. She wondered what reaction visitors of the park would have once her alteration was found out. Not that she would stick around to find out. Still having the former breasts of the statue, Jessie placed them on herself. They fused just fine but didn't even fill half of her bra's cups. "Thanks for the trade," Jessica shouted while waving at the statue. Then walked home with a lighter step. Jessie clutched the roll of bills in her hand, hidden in her jacket's pocket. All the way from her client to her apartment. Another successful sale. She wondered what she would get to celebrate it. Sure, a part of it she had to set aside for rent. Jessica was still angry at her landlord. But every time she met Mr. Kasiragi, a burst of glee flooded her. He had no idea that she used to be Joshua, still living right under his nose. Letting herself into the apartment, Jessica shrugged out of her jacket. Maybe a new outfit was in order. The next weekend, she had her third date with Anthony. She hoped it would run smoothly, as she planned to tell him her big secret. And maybe, if Anthony was understanding enough, she might go a step further in their relationship. Miss White Creek? Jessica froze. Had she just misheard? Slowly turning around, her fear was confirmed. Sitting in a chair in the reading parlor was a witch. Black suit, white shirt, and black fedora. A blue tie was the only spot of color on the witch. Should she run? Who knows what a witch can do? Right now, Jessie was ready to do everything to avoid another enchantment on her. They tended to stick around. "I guess I messed up," Jessica asked as she stepped into the room. "My name is Agent Driscoll. Please have a seat, Miss White Creek." Swallowing hard, Jessica moved to do so. "Joshua?" That voice. Jessica turned around. "Twila?" She flung herself in her friend's arms, crying tears of joy. "It's Jessica now," she said after finally letting go. "I see. Look at you." Twila shifted her hug to holding Jessica at arm's length. "You look gorgeous. And you look dash only now." Jessica noticed her friend's wardrobe. Black suit, white shirt, and black fedora, rounded off by a blue tie. "Yeah, Twila shifted uncomfortably, clearly embarrassed. "It's a long story. You joined the CWC?" Anger welled within Jessie. "You could have come by at any time? I stayed away to protect you." If Jessica slapped her, not even holding back. "I waited for you, hoping every day you would come home. I kept growing, Twila, for months, and they were bigger than beach balls. If I hadn't learned how to peel them off, I might have died from them. Squished to death in an apartment I couldn't escape from. I am sorry." Twila fell to her knees, hugging Jessica's legs. I hadn't known. I thought you would be fine. That you would stop growing at the designated limiter. As quick as her anger came, it fell away as Jessica saw her friend begging. She too got down and hugged her friend dearly, just glad that they finally were reunited. Perhaps now is a good time to sit down? Driscoll suggested, clearly unperturbed by the emotional display before her. Perhaps if you allow me to explain, things will look better. Jessica swept away her tears. I am not in trouble? In trouble? Quite, Agent Driscoll admitted. But less so, now that we are here. Now, again, how about we sit together and enjoy a cup of tea? A choked-up laugh escaped Jessica. She then stood up and helped Twila onto her legs too. Both looked worse for wear but took a seat anyway. Now, it may look like a betrayal to you, Driscoll opened after taking a sip of tea. But Twila, your adoptive aunt, was quite helpful in tracking down a wanted criminal. Well, at least the breadcrumb trail. You see, there is a witch out there, Miss White Creek. One that targets individuals with magical potential too low to awaken as a witch such as you or witches that barely manage to do so. Like Twila. She's nasty, Twila insisted. She puts dangerous spells into unwitting hands. We think people like you are her target. The spells she gives witches learn to control how much enchantments interact with them. Create a boundary. And in addition, all spells are created to prevent the accidental intermingling of enchantment and individuals. Those that she hands out are not just missing the safety feature, it promotes the fusing. Wait a moment. Jessica leaned forward. The spell you used on me. You're talking about Colette. Both witches looked shocked and glanced at each other. It was Agent Driscoll who spoke up first. How do you know about Colette? She comes by now and then. Just last week, she sat in this chair. Every few months she checks in on me and Jessica stopped. First by shock. Then anger welled within her again. To check on my progress. I was her guinea pig. All her questions. She was interrogating me. Concern my ass. I was nothing more than a test subject. That is troublesome, Driscoll admitted. We may need to ask you further questions if you don't mind. Sure. Everything to help. Jessica leaned back. Now feeling a bit drained. What happens now? Well, your little side hustle has to end. Agent Driscoll sounded adamant about it. We can help financially. That should be of no concern. We can help with your new ability, Twila added. I am afraid it has been too long a part of you to remove it. Or reverse its side effects. That's okay. Jessica gave a sheepish grin. I kinda made my peace with it. I love it, actually. I am glad to hear it. Twila reached out and took Jessica's hand. But I promise, now that I know, I will help. We can't remove it, but maybe I can teach you to better control it. You might not be a witch, but magic is a part of you now. You should be in charge of it. Okay. Yeah. That's good to hear, Jessica admitted. But that's not what I meant. What happens now in regards to Colette? Driscoll took another sip of tea before answering. That is of no concern to you fuck that. Jessica. No, Twila. I want to be part of it. Jessica slammed her hand on the table, spilling some of the tea. Just to underline her point. I was wronged and I am the victim here. You want to take her down? I'm in. And we all know you need me. Driscoll raised an eyebrow. How so? As I said, Colette comes by. Jessica couldn't help it and let smugness color her voice. I'll be your bait and trap in one. Just let me keep this apartment and keep some distance. Soon or later, Colette will come by again. And then, I'll hand her to you on a silver platter. Maybe with a few additional breasts in odd places, but that sentiment Jessica didn't voice aloud. Driscoll drummed a few times on the table, clearly thinking, then offered her hand for shaking. I am open to the idea. Granted, the higher-ups have to sign this off. But for now, welcome to the team." Jessica shook on it, grinning all the way. Now, everything looked up. There was just one last question burning in her mind. "I have to ask. If Twila kept her distance on purpose, what did I do that gave me away?" Twila laughed out loud, but Agent Driscoll kept her cool, simply sliding her hand into her jacket and withdrawing a smartphone. A few taps and she showed Jessica the screen. A video was played. It was the view of a security camera, catching a slightly drunk Jessica switch breasts with a bronze statue. Twila slapped her playfully on the shoulder. "Well, niece, you better learn to be more discreet if you want to play spy for us." Jessica groaned. Somehow she had known that act of naughtiness would come to haunt her later. Still, things looked up. She got a boyfriend. Twila was back in her life. She couldn't wait to get Colette between her finger and maybe some light revenge torture with tits. All in all, it was a lot. Or as she remembered how to shorten it, tits a lot. Yet, she was looking forward to it.